When writing a story, it is imperative to know the point of view. It seems so trivial. The POV is often looked upon as secondary to the main story. Although this is sort of true, the point of view can vastly determine the enjoyment, mood, and flavor of the story. Often by choosing the wrong POV, the story itself can seem off, boring, dull, or simply not enjoyable. In this video, I'm going to give you a few suggestions and tips on choosing a point of view. Something to think about while creating your story. Now, before we get started, let's briefly go over the different types of POVs that a person can instill while writing a book. There is first person, which means the main character or characters are telling the story themselves. They can be telling a story to a specific person within the story, or as a narrator to us, the reader. Depending on whom the character is talking to can depend on what's shared from that character and more. An example of first-person storytelling is my own book, Repeat Offender. There's even a video detailing writing a book with that style, first person, at the novel's homepage. That information will be available in the description below. And there's also the second person point of view. This is when you, the reader, is a part of the story. It's almost like a video game, basically, but this style of book were very much popularized by the Choose Your Own Adventure series. I did love these as a kid because it allowed me to be a part of the book as a character, as well as also help expand my horizon and thoughts as far as being in a story and not just reading a story. And the last POV is the third person. This is when an outside narrator is telling the story. With third person, the story can be told limited, which means they're only stating what a normal person can see from an outsider's point of view. For example, their actions, the words, stuff of that nature. However, there is also third person omniscient, which means the narrator knows the character's thoughts and emotions as well. With third person, the story can be told following one character or multiple. Many books are written to only follow one character, and there's others who do, of course, follow multiple. And When Roses Cry does that and follows a variety of people depending upon where the story needed to flow. When doing this, make sure you're clear in whom you're following so the tone is consistent with the characters as well as the flow of the book. Now, to help with choosing a point of view, I would suggest writing a brief outline. It doesn't have to be from any one character, but just something that gives a brief foundation or bare bones of the story. Often when doing this, the story will reveal who's the main character as well as the interesting people to track. Now, there are a lot of writers who don't necessarily do this. They just sit down, have an idea, and go for it. But I figured to at least share what helps me keep the story in order. Sometimes you might already know who that is, so you probably just want to go and just start creating that story. But here are a couple of other notes or information to possibly help you out as far as what you could consider as far as points of view. For example, a question you might ask is, how much information should be shared with the audience? For example, in When Roses Cry, it was cool to share with the people information from all sides and all people. Well, as many characters as possible. Now, this included multiple protagonists and antagonists as well. However, in Repeat Offender, it was more important to only get the main character's point of view to hide some of the secrets and other information. This way, the audience can learn at the same time as the primary character any information that's presented in the book and not be too far ahead of those of that particular person that you're reading about. Being too far ahead of the characters can sometimes be frustrating and or dull to the audience. In mystery stories especially, it's very important to figure out how to design the story. This way, the audience can guess at the whodunit portion of the novel and also, of course, on the crime. This is favorable compared to already knowing who did the crime, except for sometimes rare circumstances. I know, for example, that particular style of storytelling was told through a TV show in the Columbo Detective series. It's very unique, but they didn't quite quite a well way as far as how they introduced the crime and then how he had to be able to solve it. Now, sometimes an author would tell a part of the story from an antagonist's point of view, but would not include their name and will only give basically their basic identity and also whatever their actions might be. This style of writing is very popular in Dan Brown's Robert Langdon series. Another idea to think about is how many characters do you want to follow? This is where having an outline can be helpful. It's good to know what is important to the story. We often like to tell or show everything we can for a reader, but that might not be helpful. Unless of course you're telling an epic like George R.R. Martin's Fire and Ice series. Those books are designed to follow characters all over the mystical and mythical land of Westeros and more, Easteros as well, as though it was a list almost of a historical documents instead of just a general type of story. Sometimes it's in the best interest of the story to tell from multiple viewpoints, for example, George R.R. Martin's story. So that way, the reader won't be confused, and that way also the reader can have an understanding of the complete story. But this is not always necessary. You can choose to follow only one or two or just three characters if you want throughout the entire book. Really cipher through an outline and figure out who's interesting enough to follow. And this also brings me to another point. Are the characters interesting? They must be interesting or entertaining. We, the reader, have to want and have a desire to follow them. If that character is plain or boring, then they better be in some really interesting situations. Plus, it helps if we care about the character's situation and they themselves. There's nothing worse than following a person that you don't like or care about. It makes getting through the story and book a chore. And also, one last thing to consider is don't be afraid to follow the villains or antagonists. Now, not so much in a book, but a great movie did this, called The Avengers Infinity War. We technically saw the movie from Thanos, who was the antagonist, and the Avengers were the protagonist's viewpoints. And the story was from the villain's viewpoint, with the heroes going in and out of the story. But to be real, from a different perspective, in Thanos' mind, he's the protagonist, and it was the Avengers who was the antagonist. So it was a really unique way of telling a story, as far as you can almost see the viewpoints of both sides. And this can make the story interesting, and I know in Roses there are moments when this happens. It's not often, and in future tales will most definitely move through the story from the hero and villain standpoint to the degree where there might be some people who might actually look at the villain as the good guy, and then some people might look at the hero as the good guy. This way you can get a complete story and not just from one of the do-gooders, as we like to say, in the story. Well, I hope that at least helps get you started. There is a wealth of means and be able to tell your story. The best thing to do is to just do it. You might get through it and finish the story and realize, oh, you know what, that probably would have been told if I told it a little bit differently. Depending upon where you are in the process, you might just have to be able to be happy and just go on from there, or you could go back and change it. But oftentimes we want to keep changing and keep changing and keep changing a story repeatedly to make it perfect. Just make the story the best that you can possibly make it. Do what you can, but you can't really worry about perfection, or else you'll never get that story done. Have fun and just keep writing. I like what Stephen King says, and I've seen him in various different interviews, where he says he treats his work, writing, basically as like a job. He sits down and he writes, like it's a regular shift. He treats it no different than anyone else who goes to work from 8 to 5 or 9 to 6 or whatever your time might be. He wakes up, gets his drink, his breakfast, wherever he's got to do, he sits down and then he crafts books. And I love it because that's kind of the mindset that writers should actually have. Treat it like it's a regular job if you have the means and ability to do so. So, there are many stories that's probably swimming around in your mind. Share as much as you can and try different ways to tell that story. Those stories. Don't try to stick with the exact same thing every single time. There's so many unique ways to tell stories from different characters. Sometimes you just have to go out there and have fun. Will every single story idea works? Maybe, maybe not. But you know what? Do the best that you can and have fun, because it's going to impress, or it's going to allow somebody out there will enjoy that particular story. Well, that's all I just want to say for now, but thanks for your support. And to read a story that is told through third person omniscient from multiple characters' point of view, then check out When Roses Cry. Information is in the description below, so you can get a copy today. Thanks again, and have a great time writing that next bestseller.